It's Monday, February 26, 2018 at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and this is Higher Ed Live Special Edition. I'm your host, Erin Spinka, and on today's live broadcast, we're talking about next month's College and University Public Relations and Associated Professionals Conference. Higher Ed Live Special Edition is part of the Higher Ed Live Network. Our episodes offer you direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. Be part of our live broadcast by sharing your knowledge, and participate in today's discussion by tweeting us using Higher Ed Live. All of our episodes are free and easy to access in the video archives at higheredlive.com, or you can take the Higher Ed Live podcast episodes with you on the go by subscribing to the podcast. Today's episode is made possible by Higher Ed Live. Is produced by M. Stoner, a digital-first agency committed to tailored solutions that drive real results. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a digital, I double copied and paste. We know you've wondered what prospective teens are thinking when they receive and read or ignore your institution's recruitment marketing and in partnership with NRCCUA, the myth-busting enrollment marketing research uncovers the best marketing channels and communication preferences that have the biggest influence on prospective teens' perception of your institution. Early release signups end this afternoon. Don't miss your chance to sign up and receive early access to the research results and white paper releasing next week. We guarantee that learning will be fun at CUPRAP's 3-day professional development conference in Lancaster, PA. Gain strategic insight and find out what's trending in higher education communications to strengthen your pivotal role and boost awareness in your institution. CUPRAP is March 14th through 16th, 2018 at the Lancaster County Convention Center in Marriott Penn Square. This is a great opportunity to network and share ideas with your associates and friends. CUPRAP offers a very low price for your 3-day attendance, providing the best value for your professional development dollar. We'll be tweeting out a link shortly with registration information. I'm originally from PA and can say that Lancaster is a beautiful part of the state. And also I snuck a peek at the conference lineup and it looks awesome. So I'm super excited to be chatting with Gabe Welsh. Gabe Welsh is the president of Strategic Communication and Marketing at Huniana College, where he oversees operation in marketing, branding, communications, digital and emerging media, and public relations. He also serves as the president of the board of directors of CUPRAP, and somehow in his free time, he is also the author of 4 books of poems, short stories, book reviews, and essays. So I'm super excited you took a few minutes out of your schedule to join me today to talk a little bit about the upcoming conference. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Erin. I'm very happy to be here. And I'm particularly appreciative to M. Stoner for not only this program, but for being one of the sponsors for CUPRAP's conference this year. So thanks for having me.
It really does look like an excellent lineup. I'm always super excited to see content strategy in these types of conferences. And before we jump into the questions, though, I have a lot. I want to remind our viewers today that we want you to ask questions too. So please send along your questions by using #HigherEdLive, and I'll do my best to ask them as they come in. But first, I've got to ask my own questions. So as a PR marketing comm staffer at my own university, I found in my description the lineup to actually be pretty drool worthy. Like I mentioned, content strategy, analytics. When I see those types of things together in one space, I get very excited. What can we expect from next month's lineup at the conference?
Well, I'm glad you asked. One of the things that CUPRAP prides itself on, and upon which we've built our reputation, is you get your hands dirty pretty quickly at the conference. And so each Wednesday, the Wednesday afternoon going into each conference each year in the spring, there's always a hands-on starter, whether it's to write a story or to do some interviews. One year we did real-time crisis communication almost. People had tabletop scenarios and they had to stand up and handle a crisis in real time as we were there. That was nerve-wracking. This year on the Wednesday, we start with Stephen Mumma, who's the creative director at First Person. And he's been to CUPRAP before. In fact, the last time he was there, we had to make catapults out of office supplies and anything else in the room in teams. And so the Wednesday session is always designed to sort of break you out of that rut from which you left work, you had the rut, you come here, you get your creative juices flowing. And so there's going to be a 3-part spell for generating quality ideas he's going to walk us through. Using techniques from improv, problem design remedies, all kinds of different ideas. And it's always invigorating. The other thing, and I think it's germane to a point you made earlier about the content analysis, content planning strategy, and those sorts of things, is that CUPRAP, because we attract people from, whether it's a public relations track, communications, marketing, design, user experience, and so forth, or people who do many of those things at the same time, we are shaping the conferences as the profession is changing. And so we have 3 different tracks at this year's conference. This is the first time we've broken really into defined tracks. So there's one for content strategy, one for design and user experience, and one for communications and marketing. There's going to be a panel on internal communications, how colleges and universities handle internal communications. I was recently with a panel of vice presidents from the Pennsylvania Consortium on the Liberal Arts. Every one of us said internal communications is one of our biggest challenges. We have a listserv at CUPRAP. That problem came up a lot on the listserv last fall, so here we are, we're putting it in the conference. So I think that shows how member responsive we are. We're looking at team building in a shifting profession. There'll be a panel on crisis communication, content strategy, as you pointed out, web planning. The topics are all very practical, and the sessions focus often on what you can start doing today.
That's probably my favorite part of any conference, is whenever I actually go to a session, and whether it's handouts or an example that I can immediately in an email just send off and say, hey, check this out, just saw it, let's talk about this when we get back. I love those quick action items, and I think sometimes we can get into these higher level thinking or higher up in our office type changes that would need to be instituted to make those slight tweaks happen. But whenever that groundwork kind of stuff that I can be doing in my day-to-day to make things better, that's my favorite part about conferences. Right. So I wanted to touch on a little bit about, you mentioned the focus on I want to say 3-pronged, but there's definitely a bunch of different themes going on there with designers, marketing, PR folks. Who do you recommend comes to this type of conference? Is it the design team? Is it someone from each element of the office communications or marketing space on a campus?
Well, I will say that we get people who come from all of the tracks. So we may get someone who is chiefly in PR. Where it seems to make the most difference for people is when they can come with a few members of their team. I'm thankful that at Juniata there's support from the top level for this kind of professional development. So we often do show up with a team. And because many of the sessions talk about the ways different roles within a communication or marketing office overlap, teams can get a lot out of it. That said, those who I think benefit the most from this are often the key producers. So whether they're directors or assistant directors, because of the pragmatic level of this, due to the practical nature of much of the programming, they tend to come in, they get ideas. There's a lot of networking that happens at this conference, chiefly because I think once people go and they see its power and they see how warm and inviting and convivial this group is, they come again. And so there are alliances that are made over the years. And so they benefit from coming back and being able to bounce their ideas off of one another. We are looking at more executive level programming and opportunities. There are vice presidents who show up at the conference. They're outnumbered generally by directors and that sort of thing, which makes sense because there's more of those. But we're looking to expand that area. Those executives that do come and who bring either one or two or perhaps a team find it useful as a team building environment, because of course you're there, you're all experiencing it, you're all experiencing these practical workshops and these themes, and that's very worthwhile for them as well. So that's a fancy way of saying everybody. I'll also share that Juniata and some of the other schools have brought students to the conference who are either interns or paid workers within their areas. And it's a student-friendly conference if you were to bring students. And I know that our students have benefited a great deal from being there. So.
Right to my heart. I got my start actually by attending a couple of conferences as a student, and ultimately networked with someone who helped me find this position here at Dartmouth. So I highly recommend student content producers being on your invite list to conferences and any professional development opportunities out there. So right. Definitely thumbs up for me on that.
Well, speaking of the heartwarming bit, I mean, a funny story. There's a story, a student of ours who graduated a couple of years ago, who went and got a job with an agency who is now a sponsor, a table sponsor at CUPRAP. And so she's come back and she's gone from being the student going around meeting people to now she's one of the vendor sponsors. So we're proud of that.
That's awesome. And I mean, a direct line of look at how successful this conference can help make you be in your own professional journey.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I spent a little bit of time with the schedule earlier this week and then this morning again, and I've been going through trying to identify, other than the tracks themselves, what trends might be coming out of this year's or the spring's conference. And I was wondering, what trends are you predicting will be hot topics and discussion points that kind of show up across the board in the different tracks?
So I think if you notice between content strategy, between user experience and the prevalence of data, as well as internal communication and creativity, and the fact that the tracks can blur into one another in some ways, I think and this has been happening for the last few years, we've been very conscious of it at the conference, is the changing nature of the profession itself, right? We've had this conversation about, do you go out and do you hire a writer, or do you hire a content strategist who can write, who can design, who can make decisions about placement, social, and those kinds of things? Several years ago, we had an editor from the Harrisburg Patriot News come and talk about the journalism field and how it was changing. And I have a vivid memory of her talking about no longer are they hiring a journalist so much as hiring an individual who can write the story, who can then photograph it, post it, get some video, put it out to various social channels. And they called them mobile journalists, or they called them mojos, which was an enjoyable acronym. But I think you're seeing that when you have content-driven marketing operations, where you have to be mindful of your team understanding the various elements that go into not only the content strategy, but then delivering the content in a useful way. And so the programs that we have, I think, reveal the maturation of our profession and of professional expectations for people in Marcom generally.
And even if you aren't tasked with doing more than one piece of the content production, it's always useful, in my humble opinion, to see what goes into that creation, because, you know, as a writer, you may not realize how long it takes to put a video together or to develop some design assets for the piece that you're producing. So I always think, even if you're not tasked as someone who does all of the work or more than one piece of it, that insight to seeing how much work it takes or how long you need to give just a heads up on so that you get the best product is always super valuable. Absolutely.
And hearing how other folks are handling some of the very same challenges that you have, and hearing specific examples. One of the things I will say is that when there's a theme among a lot of the presentations that we see at CUPRAP. People tend to take a case approach. They'll I mean, by case study, they'll take this is our problem, this is how we solved it, sort of thing, as opposed to a series of bromides on what makes a good this or a good that. And those cases do exactly what you just described. They provide a sense to even the person who may be a photographer, but who's in a content gen session that's predominantly around writing. That photographer gets a better sense of where he or she may fit. So that's something of value at the conference.
Yeah, definitely. And even just, I always think too, the camaraderie that surrounds, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about, or oh, we do have those same issues too. That kind of like, oh, I'm not right. alone in my struggle.
and camaraderie is key for CUPRAP. I mean, what's nice about so we're located, we draw our membership from schools throughout Pennsylvania, and then increasingly from Delaware, New Jersey, New York, and Maryland around our edges, because there's no such thing as a DelRap or whatever, right? So the other states don't yet have one, and they're being drawn to CUPRAP. Pennsylvania itself, in that area, is a microcosm of the competitive environment nationally for colleges and universities. We have a significant state system, so Penn State, Pitt, Temple, Cheney, a very robust state system of higher education, so you Lock Haven, Bloomsburg, Slippery Rock, Clarion, et cetera. And then you have more than 80 private colleges and universities, as well as community colleges and secondary schools. And we're in the Northeast, so we have a declining demographic population. So goes Pennsylvania in some ways, so goes the country. So if you want to go to a place where people are talking about the ideas and tactics and theories behind competing for students, for donor dollars, for community relations, CUPRAP is the place to get that in a very intense manner. And then, because people tend to come back year after year, because the networking is so strong, because there's such an emphasis on making time for the membership to get to know one another, there are friends there. There are friendships that start. I know that I've been with CUPRAP for a while, but I can pick up a phone and get an unvarnished opinion from one of my colleagues pretty much anytime I want. And that is something that you can't buy with a lot of money. Consultants will tell you can, but you really can't. So those are some of the elements I think that make CUPRAP a pretty special organization.
When you listed off all the schools, I forgot how kind of dense the higher ed space is in Pennsylvania. So that is an excellent, I think, comparison that, PA has a little bit of everything, and It's also it's a saturated market too. So if you're going to see that any trends or issues emerge, PA is probably a good place to check the pulse of higher ed space.
Absolutely, and ask any enrollment person; they'll tell you. And I'm going to continue to plug because essentially, I guess that's what I'm here for. One of the things that I also like about CUPRAP is we go to pains to identify when new members come to the conference for the first time, or when they come to one of our Fall West or Fall East one-day events that we have in the fall. And we've done things like have receptions where we invite new members, or we give name tags or different recognition and so forth. And try to make sure that those people are welcomed. And I know that my first time going to CUPRAP, I was approached immediately by someone to welcome me, to make sure that I felt that I was valued, answered any questions I may have had, and that ethic remains with the board and with many of our longtime conference goers.
I have to say, I've been to conferences that are in the higher ed space and also just industry specific. So marketing and PR and higher ed is definitely that. I don't know if it's our background and our welcoming of the admissions to just always kind of being ready to welcome new people to campus, but we're always super friendly.
Yeah. It's no fun being the opposite.
Exactly. So, if you look at the schedule, you can quickly see this year's theme. And I was wondering, can you tell me a little bit more about the theme of the spring conference and how you came to the superhero idea for the conference coming up?
Well, each year we try to think of an image that's going to stand out from the usual professional development stuff that you receive. And boy, do you receive a lot of it. And in this case, I think, well, first of all, I think somebody, I can't remember the exact conversation, it was in a board call, excuse me. But somebody came up with the idea of capitalizing on, the Marvel films, the resurgence of comics and graphic novels and superheroes and so forth. And then, of course, back to that notion of the multiple roles that people play, and how key brand execution is, and how the rest of the campus is depending upon our superpowers, right? They're depending on the stories that we tell. They're depending on some discipline in doing so. They're depending on how we cultivate an image that is true to our institutions and that provides value for those constituents. And so, we may not fly around an invisible plane or have a lasso of truth, but we do have a microsite and a story bank and all those kinds of things.
Very close.
And it's right, exactly. It's sort of like a lasso. I don't have a bulletproof bracelet, and I can't move very fast because I drink too much coffee and sit behind a desk. But it is I think those powers are powerful, and they infuse an entire institution. And so those great stories, how they accelerate and how they work, make the people who deliver on those superheroes.
As someone who does that, I definitely appreciate that title. I think I'm going to put it on my door.
That's good. These are my Clark Kent glasses. I take them off.
So what are you looking forward the most about the spring session? Is there a particular speaker or breakout session that you're really excited about?
Well, as the president who nominally represents the institution and invited everybody, I think it's like choosing between your children. They're all my favorite, Aaron. I can't believe you asked that. But if I had to seriously think about it, it is a hard question. I will say though that given the reaction on our listserv of our members in the fall when the internal communication question was broached, and knowing that that is a responsibility of mine to improve on Juniata's campus, I am very much looking forward to the internal communication discussion. As we get our collective game together for telling the stories of the institution to an external body, and all of that professionalization that's happened recently, I think at some places we've lost how we talk back to ourselves about our successes and what we do. It was sobering. The president for whom I worked, Jim Trohat at Juniata College, came in about 4.5 years ago, and one of the things that struck him was, as a candidate for the president, how much he knew about the institution, that when he came and started talking to people, and it was spotty here and there, or it was inconsistent. And it wasn't because the stories weren't there or people didn't know or understand. It was, we could have done a better job speaking internally in one voice, and sharing the successes of the institution, sharing how we talk about our challenges. So I'm very much looking forward to the internal communication discussion. That said, Stephen Mumma, I'm interested to see what kind of catapult I'll make, or whether I'll do miming, or what it is I'm going to do on Wednesday to try to get the creative juices flowing. But most of all, when I walk into the hallways and I see the vendors who come back and the sponsors, and I see my colleagues from around the state who left with big ideas last year, and we get to see how those ideas panned out for them, and we get to reforge those connections, and to welcome the new members who it's always very gratifying to hear them at the end of the conference say, "This is great, I'm coming back, I'm telling my VP about this," or what have you. That's what does it for me. That's what I'm really looking forward to.
I want to say I've seen it a couple of times pop up. I think one was in a 2018 trend report from M. Stoner, even, that talked about the resurgence of the internal audience, and how in our kind of fight to continue communicating successfully with prospective, current, and alumni audiences, we've kind of lost that, our staff and our faculty and those internal cheerleaders and champions of your brand that are the ones that have more hands-on time with, these audiences that we're trying to reach typically, and how this year is the year that we're going to start remembering and trying to craft our content in a way that also is useful or easy to find or share for those audiences. So I'm excited to see one of the first conferences, a bigger conference this year, focusing on that, or having that as a large element of their sessions and lineup.
Yeah, I am too. It is funny that it's one of those things, right? The zeitgeist asserts itself, and I think we're experiencing a moment where everybody in higher ed, and I'm not sure what it is, and it may be the degree to which advancement and marketing have become so professional, and the demands have become so professional that those offices spend a lot of time working with, whether it's consultants or whether just more purposefully with themselves or with boards or with different constituents. And so there's not as much time to be out on campus and be present and so forth. And I know that it is not unique to our campus. I think Juniata's as far as institutions go on the smaller side. We have about 1,600 students and about 120 faculty. And we have the advantage of getting to know one another. We see one another on campus and so forth. And so even then, if we see each other at enrollment events, if we see each other in town at the grocery store, so forth, if we're having a hard time keeping the story straight, I can't imagine what other institutions are doing. So I think that this will not only be on the docket for this year, I expect to see this topic come up in other years as well.
Oh, absolutely. I'm excited about just seeing it on schedules. I think it's something I'm always interested in, is that, you know, again, they're the people that are communicating on behalf of us, and we really need to start giving them better toolkits and just even treating them like actual users, because they are consuming our content, they're interacting with our websites for different purposes, but still in a capacity that we should care about, because again, they're members of our community at first, and secondly, they have hands-on one-on-one sessions regularly with other target audiences we're looking to communicate with. And so I'm excited to see it.
Yeah. So, and we're balancing that too with, so we have several, a few sessions as well on the docket about just trends, like what is the emerging Generation Z, and hopefully they get a better name for them. I was Generation X. That's not a great name. So hopefully we get a better name for that generation. We're looking at more of those kinds of insights as well, and I think having a mix of those high level conceptual and demographic concerns against the pragmatic and against internal communication, it'll be a very robust program. There will be a lot for people to absorb, and a lot of exercises in dealing with those things.
Yeah, I was looking at it, and I not only does it, the one session that really caught my attention, target the upcoming audiences, or the incoming prospective student generations, but they also talk about video, which I was really excited to see, because video, as we all know, is continually becoming more and more prominent in how we're telling stories and how people are consuming stories. And so
here we are.
Yep, exactly. And so that was a session that really stood out to me, because I think a lot of schools are still operating on video being kind of a supporting element rather than a true, this is how we're going to tell the story way.
Rather, the choice of whether to make it a director level position, or, well, we have a student who's good with technology, although I think that's largely going away. Because, a lot of colleges went into social, as they should have. And social has become an image-driven media rather than a text-driven media. And so you have more of those kinds of demands. So we've had video at the conference, in one form or another, probably for at least the last 10 years. And again, I think that reflects probably the fact that Pennsylvania is so competitive. A lot of the early adopters for that kind of thing were in Pennsylvania, although CUPRAP draws speakers from all over the place. Memorably, we had a video team in from Brown a few years ago. And so when we bring in our speakers, we do look nationally and not just to our membership. Although plenty of our members also present at those conferences, as well as at other places, CASE and AMA and so forth. So that's good. But the video element, I think, has been a mainstay, and has gone beyond just, you really need to do video. It's important, to some of the strategies, to the most recent discussions where how can you make the case for staffing? How do you do staffing? The presumption, I guess, at CUPRAP being that you're going to do video. You just got to figure out how you got to do it now.
Yeah, it's no longer kind of a if we do, it's a definite we need it. How do we do it well?
Right. It didn't suffer the fate of QR codes, for instance.
Which I would not be surprised if they make somewhat of a comeback, because more phones are including them as native apps in their camera. So wouldn't that be like I don't even know when the first one came out, but like a decade later, QR codes, retro throwback.
Near point technologies we're gonna have to give people something that they can access, because we're seeing that every medium we choose in which we decide to push People leave it, right? So Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. If we get too far into Snapchat, they're going to leave that. They don't read emails. You know, my own daughter is in the college search at the moment, and it's just so sobering. I had a print material the other day from a place that she was considering, and I said, "Well, this is on your list. Do you want to look at this?" No. This is all the information. I'll find it on the web. I'm like, well, it might not be updated, says me, a marketing guy. And no, she didn't care. She was just going to check out and see what everybody else had to say. And very sobering to be a marketing professional in higher ed on the college search.
Almost like we should require every so many years someone in the office either have going through the process of a college search by signing up and getting all of the mail and emails and communications, or we should just make sure that every year someone in the space has a child that's going through it, because it's always a great conversation starter whenever your VP has someone that's has a student or a son or daughter student age that's going through the process, and how that changes their input because they see the student discard the print material and oh, well, maybe we shouldn't be sending these monthly. Maybe it's a quarterly piece. Maybe it's once a year. It's a great experience.
Yeah, it is sobering. I mean, we're lucky at Juniata. A lot of our folks will drop by my office and say, "Hey, look what they sent us." So we've been collecting that kind of stuff.
I do too. So, I have a real source.
A couple of years ago, at CUPRAP, we brought in a student panel to talk about enrollment publications. That might have been a few years ago now, but so we've tried that idea. That was interesting.
That's awesome. That sounds really that would be great.
Yeah,
I think they probably should have brought in everything that they got in the mail as well. That would have been a nice visual to see the stacks and stacks.
That would have been very depressing had any CFOs been there. But yes, they should have done that.
So, okay, let's say, you've convinced me, but I need to convince the boss. What's the elevator pitch to get that sign of approval to head on down to Lancaster in March?
Right. Well, I'd say the first thing is that if you send someone to head to Lancaster in March, they will leave that conference with things that they can start doing on Monday when they get back. It is a very pragmatic conference. It's a very welcoming network. So they will leave with something to do, and they will leave probably with 3 or 4 contacts to whom they can reach out and move forward. Second, there is a real team dynamic at the conference. Again, that because it's the scale is right, and because the people who go there and who populate the board and who are among our volunteers are committed to helping one another out. I will never forget, I heard a board member from industry say to me once, "I don't understand higher ed. You compete so fiercely, and then every couple of months you go and tell everybody what you did." He says, "In industry, we wouldn't do that. It would be suicide." But there is that team dynamic. And finally, it is the right price for the experience. We are aware that we are more affordable, and frankly, we're affordable because of our sponsors, as well as some of the deals we're able to work out within network. But M. Stoner is helping us with this conference, as is GraphCom, 215 Marketing, Carnegie, Dartlet, and a number of other table vendors whose support we absolutely appreciate for making this possible. And so overall money spent, bang for the buck on this is going to be very high for a relatively low outlay. And it's an easy location. For our network, Lancaster is within 2 hours or so of virtually all the participating schools, with the notable exception of Juniata.
That seems odd. I feel like as president,
well,
you didn't pull the right strings there.
It's a board; everybody collaborates. But for most of our schools, so with all of those schools having access to that central location, and if people were coming in from someplace else, Lancaster is not far from the international airport in Harrisburg. And you say, do you have anyone? Yes, we have someone in Arkansas. We have a member in Idaho. They often are people who are in Pennsylvania in higher ed. This is probably one of our best testimonials, who left the state to go pursue a position somewhere else and who feel that it's worth their while to come back and visit CUPRAP on their professional dime at the cost of a plane ticket and so on, rather than other options they may have. So I think that speaks volumes if you're going to go to your boss and say, hey, I should go to this place. They really love it.
I was going to say, that's a great testimonial. Like, again, across the country, it's totally worth it.
Yeah. We'll put that on our next postcard.
So a couple of questions about, I'm, interestingly enough, even though I host a web show, I'm somewhat of an introvert. You mentioned the size and the scale of the conference. So I wanted to ask for, people who maybe stay away from larger conferences because there's a lot to consume or so much going on. What is about the size of the conference or the spring session?
So this year we're probably going to have around 200 attendees. And so if you've been to CASE or AMA or Higher Ed Web or someplace like that, those all tend to be larger conferences. And so the scale is very accessible. And I've noticed that people can, and we've chosen our conference location, convention center for 40 or so years. We were at the Hotel Hershey. And we look for locations that have little places where you can go sit, where you can go off the beaten track, where if you meet somebody you want to have a sort of a more one-on-one conversation, you can do that. There's time built into the schedule for those sorts of things. There's lots of networking opportunities, but it's not a sort of a high-pressure competitive sort of scenario. So when we went to the Lancaster Convention Center in the Marriott there, we chose that location because it could satisfy that need for our members. And there are probably more introverts in marketing than people expect there to be. And so it's okay as far as that goes. And again, the size, about 200 attendees, it's enough that it makes our sponsors and our vendors very happy because they get to interface with a lot of people. And in particular, they get to interface with a lot of the people who use their products on a day-to-day basis and can make the argument for them. And as well, it's very good for the members who can meet everybody at a reasonable scale with a reasonable expectation.
Yeah, I was going to say 200, when I hear that number, it kind of dings in my head as, the speakers or the presenters won't be overwhelmed or unreachable, for lack of a better description, because there's so many people there, or even the conference organizers pull them away so quickly that they don't get time to talk because the conference is so big.
Well, you raise a very good point that shame on me for not mentioning it earlier. Because of the size, the speakers are accessible, and many, not all, but many of our speakers will stay for at least one of the days, if not the entirety of the conference. And they are approachable, and we're not organized in such a way that, the sort of inner circle whisks away the person to speak with the secret cabal back in the back room while the rank and file go around eating cupcakes. We're committed to that kind of access. And so unless the person has to really fly in, fly out kind of thing, they're generally available to the membership. And often a session will end with people clustered at the front, which happens at a lot of places. But and those conversations continue. And you can usually, if you want to speak to the speaker or you want to get in touch with somebody who's on one of the panels, it's not that difficult to do it.
Yeah, that's whenever I ask about the size of a conference, I'm always really trying to figure out, well, if I see a really great session, how quickly do I have to move from my seat to get some one-on-one time with them? Because I always have a bajillion questions.
Sure.
So one last final question from me, which might be the most important one, I think, of today. When's the last day to register for the conference, and I'll tweet it out, but how do people register?
So you register, you go to cuprap.org, CUPRAP.org. Everything you need to do is there. The e-commerce interface is there. The full program is there. So that's what you do. The last day for registrations is coming upon us swiftly. It is Monday, March 5th, 2018. And so that is the last day for registration. And I'm not sure about the hotel room block. I should probably text our executive director, or maybe she can tweet at me. I'm pretty sure that, but although, and that the hotel is fairly large, and there are other hotels right in the center of Lancaster. So, and for those who may be coming from out of state, it's Lancaster. If you say Lancaster, we will know that you are from far away.
I can testify to that 100% true. If you say it the wrong way, people know you're from out of town.
Right.
But
they'll give you bad directions if you're lost if you say Lancaster.
But I will again put another plug in for the area. It is absolutely beautiful. Lots of good food, lots of cool, quirky little historical places around the area. That side of the state really does. I'm from Pittsburgh, so I'm not supposed to really love Philadelphia area, but I can say that the Lancaster and the Hershey area is absolutely beautiful. Beautiful PA countryside.
Right, and where we're located in the sort of the old city in Lancaster. And so what's nice about this location too is in previous years at the Hotel Hershey, which was a perfectly wonderful place, but it was a Hotel Hershey and then it was a giant field. There was a whole lot else to do. This location is right amid sort of a thriving cafe, gallery, theater area right in the center of the city. And so if you've not been to Lancaster, that's another good reason. It might not compel your boss as much, but it's certainly a good reason for you.
Definitely a personal plus, at least.
Right.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. So I just want to say a quick thank you, as always, to our program sponsors and M. Stoner, and a huge thank you to Gabe for joining me today and giving us an inside look at next month's must-attend CUPRAP conference. The lineup, if you haven't checked the conference schedule out, I'm going to tweet a link out directly to the pamphlet so that you can take a look through the sessions, but it really is a great mix of the design, the content strategy, user experience, internal communications. And finally, a thanks to you, our viewers, for spending the past hour with me. You make the whole show possible. So everyone, Gabe, and have a wonderful rest of your Monday and enjoy the last few days of February, which I cannot believe I'm actually saying.
Thank you, Erin. It's been a pleasure.